I want to tell you about a champagne flute. It was crystal, the kind that costs more per glass than most people spend on groceries for a week. And it was sitting in the right hand of a two-star general named Thomas Hargrove, a man who had, over the course of his career, authorized airstrikes, ordered evacuations under fire, and once sat across a conference table from men who wanted him dead, without moving a muscle in his face. He was not the kind of man who lost his composure. He was exactly the kind of man who set that glass down. Not dropped, not thrown, set down, with the deliberate, controlled precision of someone who has just heard something that requires both hands free. The crystal stem touched the white linen tablecloth at 6:47 p.m. on a Saturday in April, in a ballroom at the Belmont Charleston Place, and the sound it made, that single, soft, definitive click, traveled across the room in a silence that had no business existing, in a space filled with 200 wedding guests and a live string quartet. The string quartet had stopped playing. I noticed that first. Not the faces, not the whispers that followed. The music simply ceased, mid-phrase, as if someone had lifted a needle from a record. And for 3 full seconds, the only sound in that entire gilded room was the hum of the chandeliers overhead, and the faint pulse of traffic on Market Street 7 floors below. Constance Whitfield, my ex-mother-in-law, the woman who had for 8 consecutive years referred to me as Derek's first wife, in a tone that made the phrase sound like a medical condition, was still smiling when the general's expression changed. She didn't see it happen. She was already turning back toward the champagne tower, already moving on to the next social transaction, already finished with me the way she had always been finished with me, efficiently, and without ceremony. She didn't see the way General Hargrove's eyes locked onto my face. She didn't see the stillness that moved through him, like a current through still water. The way his chin came up exactly 1/4 of an inch. The way the smile left his face, not into displeasure, but into something older and more precise. Recognition. I had been standing at the edge of the reception for 11 minutes at that point, holding a glass of sparkling water, watching the room, the way I had been trained to watch rooms. Exits first, then clusters, then individuals, old habits. You don't unlearn them, you learn when to hide them. My left knee was aching. It always aches at formal events. Something about standing still on marble floors activates the scar tissue. From a hard landing in Kandahar in 2007, the one that compressed 3 discs and earned me 6 weeks in the Bagram Medical Facility, and a physical therapist named Santos, who told me I would probably never jump again. I jumped again 18 months later. I did not tell Santos. I shifted my weight to my right foot and kept watching the general. He was watching me. But to explain why that moment happened, why a 2-star general in a dark suit went completely still at the sound of a name, I need to take you back to the beginning. Not of the mission, of the marriage. My name is Margaret Calloway. I am 48 years old. I live in a house in Fayetteville, North Carolina, that I bought for cash in 2021, 3 months after I submitted my retirement paperwork. And it is the first property I have ever owned that no one else has a claim on. It is not a large house, 700 square feet, 2 bedrooms, a narrow kitchen with a window that looks out over a neighbor's magnolia tree. I chose it because it was quiet, because it was 7 minutes from Fort Liberty, and because the mortgage would have been $812 a month if I had needed one. I didn't need one. I drive a 2016 Toyota Tacoma with 94,000 miles on it. I own 3 suits and 1 dress, the navy one I wore to the wedding, and exactly enough jewelry to look appropriate at a government function, without looking like I am trying. On Tuesday and Thursday mornings, I volunteer at a veterans support center off Bragg Boulevard, where I sit with men and women who are struggling to translate 20 years of classified experience into a resume that civilian human resources departments can process without asking follow-up questions. They don't have the clearance to hear the answers to. I know exactly what that translation feels like. For 8 years, from 2011 until the morning I drove away from a house in Charleston that was registered in Derek Whitfield's name, Anyone who asked what I did for work received the same answer. Government work, intelligence analysis, pretty administrative. Honestly, I said it with a small shrug, a slight downward inflection, the verbal equivalent of a half step backward, to give the conversation room to move on without me. I let them believe it. In the right pocket of whatever jacket I wear, I keep a brass compass. My father gave it to me the morning I left for basic training in 1997. It is a standard lensatic compass, the kind that costs $14 at any Army surplus store, and it has a small dent in the upper left corner, from the time it stopped a piece of shrapnel in Kandahar, that would otherwise have entered my right palm. The dent is not dramatic, it simply exists, the way most important things exist, without ceremony. Most people, when they see it, assume it is old and cheap. They are half right. I held that compass in the parking garage across from the Belmont Charleston place for 4 minutes before I went inside. What I had been since 2003, what lived in my service jacket in a folder that 99% of the military would never have the clearance to open, was a lieutenant colonel in Army intelligence, Special Operations Support, 22 years of active duty, 4 combat deployments, the recipient of a Distinguished Service Medal, 2 Bronze Stars, and a mission designation so specific, it has its own 3-letter classification code. My call sign was Ghost. I earned that name not because I was invisible, though I was, but because the operators I worked alongside would report, in their after-action reviews, that they were never entirely certain I had been physically present in the room. I operated in the space between observation and action. I gathered intelligence the way weather gathers, quietly, from everywhere, without announcing itself. Nobody in the Whitfield family ever asked what I did. I let them believe I was ordinary. I let them believe it for 8 years. I met Derek Whitfield in 2009 at a 4th of July party in Raleigh. He was 31, a third-year associate at a mid-sized litigation firm. Good-looking in the particular way of men who have recently discovered they are good-looking, and haven't yet figured out what to do with it. He had an easy laugh, and he asked follow-up questions, and he refilled my glass without being asked. I had been home from Kandahar for 6 weeks. I was still waking up at 3 a.m. to mortar fire that wasn't there. He was warm. That was the entirety of it. He was simply warm. We were married 14 months later. I wore the navy dress I already owned. He wore a rented tuxedo. His mother, Constance, wore ivory. A choice she described to guests as practical, though I observed her studying her reflection in the reception hall mirror, with an expression that suggested the color had not been an accident. Constance Whitfield was 62 years old when I entered her family. She was the widow of a Charleston real estate developer, the chair of 3 separate philanthropic committees, and the kind of woman who has assembled an identity so carefully over so many decades that any disruption to it registers, to her, as a personal attack. She was not cruel in the way that people are cruel when they are angry. She was cruel in the way that people are cruel when they are certain. She was certain about me from the first dinner. The first wave was small, and private, and entirely deniable. We had been married 4 months. Sunday dinner, at the Whitfield house on Trad Street, an antebellum double piazza home, that Constance described as something she maintained herself, though the woman who cleaned it every Wednesday was named Dolores, and had been doing so for 11 years. The table consisted of Constance, Derek, his sister Patricia, her husband Roland, and me at the far end, nearest the kitchen. Margaret, Constance said, setting her fork down in the precise way she had of setting things down when she was preparing to be informative. What exactly is it you do? Derek is always so vague about it. Intelligence analysis, I said. For the Army. Analysis. She repeated the word the way a teacher repeats a student's incorrect answer. So, desk work. Administrative. Something like that, I said. She nodded. She picked up her fork. She said, I suppose someone has to do it. And then she turned to Patricia and asked about the garden renovation. I did not correct her. I watched Derek not correct her either. The second wave came 2 years later, the week before my 3rd deployment. Derek had organized what he called a small gathering, 12 people, colleagues from his firm, his sister, Constance. I was in the kitchen finishing a cheese board when I heard Constance explaining me to one of Derek's partners. She does government work overseas, her voice carrying with the comfortable assurance of someone who has never learned to lower it. Some kind of contracting arrangement, filing, I think, or data management. Derek is always so supportive. She goes away for months, and he simply holds everything together here. I set down the knife. I picked it back up. I finished the cheese board. Derek was standing 6 feet from her when she said it. He refilled the partner's glass, nodded along, and smiled, as if confirming what she had said was simply fact. What I did not walk out of that kitchen and say, what I had never said in that house, in those precise words, was this. I was not filing paperwork in Afghanistan. I was running a network of 14 human intelligence assets across 3 provinces, coordinating with special operations units whose existence remained classified, under a cover so constructed that the State Department maintained a separate file for me that read Agricultural Development Consultant. In the 3 months before that dinner party, my network had surfaced intelligence that prevented a coordinated attack on a forward operating base. The Central Intelligence Agency station chief and the Defense Intelligence Agency had not developed that intelligence. I had. I came home to a cheese board and a story about data management. I let them believe it. The third wave was the last one that happened inside the marriage. And it is the one I return to most often. Not because it was the most dramatic, but because it is the one that most clearly shows you what I was dealing with. Easter dinner. Hangin Komchamwechin. A neighbor's son had just returned from a combat deployment, and someone brought him up at the table. His service, his courage, the difficulty of what he had been through. Real service, Constance said, refilling her glass. Those people deserve everything. She paused. In the particular way she paused when she was placing a period at the end of a sentence designed to exclude someone. Not everyone who works for the government is actually serving, of course. She looked across the table at me when she said it. A look that lasted exactly 2 seconds. Long enough to land. Not long enough to be called anything. Nobody said a word. Under the table, I turned the compass over in my pocket. Once. Twice. I said nothing. Between 2011 and 2019, Derek called me from a work crisis 11 times. Not 3. Not occasionally. 11 times across 4 time zones. Across 3 deployments. Across the particular silence of encrypted channels, where I was not supposed to be taking personal calls at all. 11 times I picked up. I talked him through a deposition strategy, from a forward operating base in Helmand in 2013. I outlined a contract dispute resolution from a vehicle in Kandahar in 2015. I identified a precedent that saved a partnership agreement from a satellite phone in Bagram in 2017. He won all 11. He never once asked where I was when I answered. Between our wedding day and that Easter dinner, I had also made 847 consecutive mortgage payments on a house in Charleston, South Carolina, registered in Derek Whitfield's name. Those payments came from combat hazard pay and deployment bonuses that Constance believed amounted to something in the low 40s for that kind of work. The most consequential of those 11 calls came in March of 2018. A vehicle in Kabul, waiting on a signal that was running 40 minutes late. Leidick was at risk of losing his most important client account, and couldn't afford to call his own firm's senior counsel at that hour. 43 minutes. I gave him the deposition strategy. I identified the case law. I hung up and went back to work. He kept the account. The client was Hargrove Industries. I did not make that connection until I was sitting in a parking garage in Charleston 3 weeks ago, turning a compass over in my hand, and looking up the bride's family name on my phone. And then Derek met someone whose family was connected to his firm's most important client. And one afternoon he sat across from me at the kitchen table and said the words, "I think we want different things." And I drove to a hotel on Gervais Street, and I sat in the parking lot until I was certain I was composed, and then I checked in and went to sleep. The divorce took 16 months. I came out of it with my savings account and the compass. He came out of it with the house. The invitation arrived by email on a Wednesday in January. Derek's personal address. Subject line, forward. Hargrove, Whitfield wedding. Guest confirmation. He had forwarded me an invitation, not mailed, forwarded. The digital equivalent of a note slipped under a door, while the building is being vacated. The wedding was April 12th. Reception at the Belmont Charleston Place. Black tie. He had added one line in his own words at the bottom. I thought you should know. It would mean a lot if you came. For closure. I read the email 3 times. I closed the laptop and went to bed. I did not respond for 11 days. On the 12th day, I was at the Veterans Center on Bragg Boulevard, sitting across from a 26-year-old Marine named Cole, who had completed 2 tours in Helmand and was trying to explain his skill set to a software application that kept requesting civilian job titles. He had been in reconnaissance. The system wanted to know if that qualified as data collection. I watched Cole's hands on the keyboard, the careful, methodical way he was hunting for words that would translate, that would make sense to people who had never needed to understand what he knew. People who would never need to understand it. I drove home. I sat in the driveway with the engine off. I took the compass from my jacket pocket and held it. Warm brass. The small dent in the upper left corner. My father had given me this compass the morning I left for basic training. A Korean War veteran. A man who said few words and meant every one. At the airport, he pressed it into my hand and said 4 words. Always know where north is. He was not talking about geography. I opened my phone and typed 1 word to Derek. Confirmed. 3 days before the wedding. I called Colonel James Rennick, retired, formerly of Army Special Operations Command, the man who had been my direct superior for 6 years, and who knew my file the way a surgeon knows an X-ray he has read 100 times. He picked up on the second ring. Ghost, he said. Jim. I was standing at my kitchen window, watching the neighbor's magnolia move in the early April wind. I need you to tell me something straight. When am I not? Thomas Hargrove, I said. 2-star, retired. Tell me his connection to the Whitfield wedding. A pause on the line. Not hesitation, calculation. He's the bride's uncle. Her father's older brother. He was J2 director when you ran the Kandahar network. Another pause. He was in the command center the night of the extraction. Maggie. He signed the secondary exfil authorization himself. I held the phone. He knows exactly who you are, Rennick said. One more thing, he said. The Hargrove name has been in Charleston philanthropic circles for 30 years. Constance Whitfield chairs 3 committees. She has been at every gala, every firm event where that name came up. A pause. She knew the name, Maggie. She just never thought to ask how Derek kept the account. I held the phone. He knows the call sign, I said. Not the face. He'll put it together. He was quiet for a moment. You know what the worst part is? He said finally. What? She had 8 years. His voice carried the particular flatness of someone stating a fact, rather than an opinion. 8 years of Sunday dinners and holidays and going away parties. 8 years to ask one question. I said nothing. She chose not to. A pause. That's not ignorance, Maggie. That's a decision. I held the phone against my ear and looked at the magnolia through the kitchen window. Wear the dress, he said. Not the blues. I know. They need to do this themselves, he said. You just need to be present. I understood what he meant. In the field, there is a principle we applied when we needed a target to reveal itself without force. You do not pursue. You create conditions. You are patient and present, and you allow the situation to develop the way it will develop. Because forced operations leave the evidence of force. Clean operations look like coincidence. I hung up and went to the closet. The service dress uniform was in a garment bag on the left side. The silver oak leaves on the shoulders. The ribbons on the chest. 22 years of documented service pressed into wool. I unzipped the bag. I looked at it. I zipped it back up. I took the navy dress from the other hanger. I had been testing environments my entire career. by allowing them to believe what they wanted to believe. I had sat across from men in rooms in Kabul and Kandahar, and let them build their assumptions about what I was and what I knew. And I had watched those assumptions become the instrument of their own exposure. I was not going to Charleston to perform anything. I was going to be present. The rest would be the truth, doing what truth does, taking up its rightful place in the room. I set the compass on the nightstand beside it. I looked at both of them for a moment, the plain navy fabric and the worn brass instrument. And then I went to make coffee, because I had a long drive in the morning, and I have never been able to sleep past 4 a.m., and I stopped apologizing for that sometime around 2009. I arrived at the Belmont Charleston Place at 5:42 p.m., 40 minutes after the ceremony ended and the cocktail hour began. I parked in the garage across Market Street. I sat in the Tacoma, with the engine off, and took the compass from my jacket pocket. 4 minutes. Warm brass. The small dent where it mattered. I knew where north was. The lobby smelled like gardenias and cedar, and the kind of money that does not announce itself, because it has never needed to. I gave my name at the reception table. The young man in the white vest found it, checked it, and handed me a card. Table 11. Near the back. Of course. The ballroom was already arranged with the architecture of wealth. Round tables under crystal chandeliers, white peonies in the centerpieces, a string quartet near the east windows playing something from Handel, 200 chairs, 3 bartenders. The wedding party table elevated on a low riser at the north end. I found a position near the bar where I could observe the full room and held a glass of sparkling water without drinking it. My left knee ached against the marble floor. I shifted my weight to my right side. I saw Derek at the head table, already loosened by the cocktail hour, laughing at something his best man said. He had not yet seen me. Constance appeared 15 minutes later. She was working the room with the purposeful ease of a woman who understands her value lies in being seen performing the right kind of attention. She was in pale gold tonight, which was a better choice than ivory. Her hair was done. Her earrings were pearl. She moved through the room the way she always moved through rooms she believed she had built, with the proprietary confidence of an owner among guests. She saw me. The recognition was immediate and controlled. A social recalibration behind the eyes. The social smile adjusting by approximately 2 degrees. She excused herself from the couple she was speaking with, and crossed toward me with her champagne flute at the precise angle of a woman who is completely at ease, which meant she was not. "Margaret," she said. Not warmly, not coldly. The way you say the name of a piece of furniture you had forgotten was still in the room. "Constance, I didn't know Derek had reached out to you." A statement, not a question. He did. She looked at my dress, my shoes, the sparkling water. Her eyes performed a rapid, experienced inventory, and arrived at a conclusion that satisfied her. "Well," she said, "I'm glad you could come. It's good for Derek to have everyone happy for him." She meant, "It is gracious of you to accept your position here." I said nothing. I held the water glass. She pivoted, and I watched her move toward a man who had just entered the ballroom from the north corridor. Late 60s. Military bearing worn so deep it had become posture, the kind you cannot acquire and cannot lose. Silver-haired. Dark suit with the fit of a man who still trained. He was carrying a champagne flute, and speaking quietly to a younger man beside him, General Thomas Hargrove. I had never met him in person. In the field, the J2 director is a voice on a secure line, a signature on an authorization, a presence in the command architecture that you understand the way you understand gravity, by its effects, not its face. But I had read his file. I knew he had been in the command center in Bagram on the night of the Kandahar extraction. I knew he had signed the secondary exfil authorization when the primary route went compromised. I knew that in the after-action review, he had written 11 words about the lead intelligence officer on that operation. I have not before encountered an asset of this precision and composure. He did not know my face. He knew my call sign. Constance reached him. She touched his arm with the familiar confidence of a woman who has decided, efficiently, that they are now family. "Thomas," she said, "come meet someone. This is Margaret Sterrick's first wife. She was with us for 8 years. She does government work. Analysis, filing, administrative support." She said administrative with the particular softness of someone placing a period at the end of a sentence they consider complete. General Hawkrove turned toward me and extended his hand, and I took it, and for one breath we were simply two people being introduced at a reception. And then Constance, who had never in her life known when a sentence was finished, added, "She was always very, what's the word? Behind the scenes. Isn't that right, Margaret?" The background type. The general's hand, which had already begun to release mine, did not release. His eyes, which had been politely attentive, went very still. I watched it happen the way I had watched many things happen in my career. From the correct distance, without expression. I felt the change in the pressure of his grip. Not tighter, steadier. The difference between a handshake concluding and a recognition beginning. He said, very quietly, "I'm sorry. What was your name?" "Margaret Calloway," I said. The champagne flute in his left hand went down. Not dropped. Set down. Onto the table nearest him, with the controlled precision of a man who needs both hands, in order to respond correctly to what is happening. The crystal stem touched the white linen with a single clean sound. A click that should have been inaudible in a ballroom with 200 people and a string quartet. The string quartet stopped playing. I do not know why they stopped. I will only tell you that they did, and that the silence that followed was not the silence of shock, but the silence of a room that has sensed something real occurring and has the instinct to make space for it. General Hargrove looked at me. He said one word, "Ghost." Not a question, not an exclamation, a statement. The kind made by someone who has just confirmed the answer to something they have been thinking about for a long time. The silence in the room lasted approximately 4 seconds. To my left, Constance was very still. To my right, the younger man who had entered with the general had taken a half-step backward, his champagne glass suspended midway to his mouth. Across the room, I was aware of Derek lowering his fork. His eyes found me, then found the general, then stayed. General Hargrove straightened. Not dramatically, simply to his full height, which was the height of a man who has spent 4 decades being the steadiest person in whatever room he occupied, and said, in a voice that carried without being raised, "Colonel Calloway." Not past tense, not retired, Colonel. The title landed the way a stone lands in still water, with a small, clean sound, and then a silence, and then rings moving outward in every direction from the center. At the round table nearest the east windows, where the general had been sitting before Constance intercepted him, 2 men I had not noticed until this moment had gone very still. Older, silver-haired, the particular upright posture of people who have spent decades being required to stand at inconvenient times, and learned to do it without announcement. One of them set down his fork. Not dropped, set down. The same motion, the same controlled precision, the same quiet that the general had used with his champagne flute 30 seconds before. Like an echo, like a room recognizing its own language. The other turned slightly in his chair, not toward me, not toward the general, but toward the space between us. The way you orient yourself toward something that requires your full attention, and your stillest body. Neither of them said a word. They did not need to. Behind me I heard a sound I did not immediately identify. Then I recognized it. Constance Whitfield's champagne flute being set on a nearby table. Not deliberately, not with control. She had simply forgotten she was holding it. I looked at General Hargrove. "General Hargrove," I said. He held my eyes. "The Kandahar extraction. November 2017. Yes, sir. 14 personnel. 13 enlisted. 1 officer. All recovered. All recovered," I confirmed. He was quiet for a moment. Then he picked up his champagne flute from the table. The same deliberate motion with which he had set it down. And he held it very slightly upward. A gesture so small that only the people immediately around us registered it. A toast. Not to anyone. To a night in November 2017 that existed in a file that most of the people in this ballroom would never have the clearance to read. I inclined my head. But before I tell you what happened in the 4 minutes that followed, please subscribe to this channel. Because what Constance Whitfield said next, and the look on Derek Whitfield's face when he crossed the room, is nothing like what you're expecting. Constance was still standing between us. She had not moved. Her mouth had opened and closed once. The social machinery that had operated her through 68 years of Charleston rooms was running, but the output was not arriving. She looked at me. She looked at the general. She looked at me again. I watched the calculation occur behind her eyes. The rapid, experienced recalibration of a woman who has just discovered that the furniture she had been stepping around for 8 years was not furniture at all, and that she has been doing it in full view of someone who understood exactly what she was stepping over. I did not help her. I had not helped her for 8 years. I was not going to start now. I didn't know, she said finally. 3 words. The entirety of 8 years. Compressed. No. I said, you didn't. Derek said you were in analysis. Administrative support. I know what Derek said. She looked at the general. He had stepped back 2 paces. Not to leave, but to allow. The particular courtesy of a man who understands that the space between 2 people is not always for him to occupy. Why didn't you ever say anything? Constance asked. Her voice had a quality I had not heard in it before. Not humility, exactly, but the texture of a woman who is asking a question she already knows the answer to, and does not want confirmed. I thought about 11 Thanksgiving dinners. I thought about the going-away party, where she had described me to Derek's partners, as doing filing, I think. I thought about the Easter dinner, where she had looked across the table and said real service, in a voice designed to exclude me from its meaning. I thought about 847 mortgage payments on a house I would never own. I thought about 11 phone calls from war zones. I thought about 43 minutes in a vehicle in Kabul. I thought about the compass in my pocket, warm from my body all day, dented from a piece of shrapnel it had stopped, so that my hand could continue doing work that no one at this wedding had ever thought to ask me about. You never asked, I said. She had no answer. There was none. Derek was waiting near the ballroom exit when I moved toward the door. He had come down from the head table. He was standing with his hands in his tuxedo pockets. And he wore the expression he always had when a case had gone wrong, before he understood the cause. The expression of a man still running the calculation. Maggie, he said. I stopped. I didn't know he'd be here. Derek said. Thomas Hargrove. I knew Lydia's father and his brother were close. But I didn't know he'd be. I didn't plan for this to. Derek. He stopped. Do you remember the phone call in March of 2018? I said. 11 p.m. You were going to lose the Hargrove account. A pause. Yes. Where did you think I was when you called? He considered this carefully. The way he considered things when he already knew the answer would cost him something. You said you were working late. I was in a vehicle in Kabul, I said. Waiting on a signal. I spent 43 minutes on the phone with you, outlining the deposition strategy, and identifying case law. And then I went back to work. I let that sit for a moment. You kept the account. And then his daughter graduated from Clemson, and her father introduced her to you at a firm event, and now she's your wife. In this hotel. On this day. I watched the shape of that information settle over him. Slowly at first, and then all at once. The way weather settles. I told you the truth every time you asked, I said. Intelligence analysis. Classified. You stopped asking. I looked at him for a long moment. The kind of look that memorizes rather than accuses. You stopped asking. Derek. And then you let your mother fill the silence with whatever made her comfortable. And you let her. He opened his mouth. You have a wedding to get back to, I said. I walked past him through the lobby, through the revolving door, and out into the April evening. The Charleston air was warm. Somewhere nearby, A church bell was marking the quarter hour. The harbor was 2 blocks south, and I could smell it, salt and low tide, and the particular mineral quality of water that has been here longer than any of the buildings built beside it. I walked across Market Street to the parking garage. I took the elevator to level 3. I unlocked the Tacoma and got in and sat with the engine off. I took the compass from my jacket pocket and held it in both palms. Warm brass. The small dent in the upper left corner. The needle settling, as it always settled, to north. I did not drive immediately. I sat in the Tacoma on level 3 of the parking garage for 4 minutes. The same 4 minutes I had sat there before going in, holding this same instrument, looking at this same needle. I watched it settle. It always settles to north. It has never once, in 31 years, pointed anywhere else. I closed the lid. The sound it made, small, clean, definitive, was the same sound as a crystal champagne flute being set on white linen. I knew where north was. I put the truck in drive and headed home. I arrived at 2 a.m. I made coffee, because I have never been able to sleep before 3 a.m. And I sat at my kitchen table. I had not opened the wooden box the compass came in since the move to Fayetteville. I had not needed to. But I opened it now. The compass lifted out easily. 31 years of the same motion. Under it, where I had not looked in a long time, was a piece of paper folded twice. My father's handwriting. 5 lines, which he had apparently considered sufficient. Maggie, you will meet people who decide what you are before you open your mouth. Let them. It costs you nothing, and teaches you everything about who they are. The hardest part isn't the fighting. It's coming home to people who don't know how to ask. Let them fill in the silence. Up to a point. Then don't. Always know where north is. Dad. I folded it back along the same creases, and set it under the compass, and closed the lid. He was not talking about direction. He never was. He was talking about the thing in you that does not move. The fixed point. The version of yourself you return to, when every other reference point has been obscured. By smoke. By the years of wrong assumptions. By Thanksgivings at the wrong end of other people's tables. North is not a place. North is the part of you that the silence cannot rotate. I have always known where north was. The compass was just the reminder I carried in case I ever forgot. I have been asked, since that evening, whether I planned it. The answer is, I created the conditions. What happened inside those conditions was the truth. And the truth does not require management once it is present in the room. It simply settles. It takes up its rightful place and stays there. And everything built on the wrong assumption has to find somewhere else to stand. What I think about most is the sound the glass made. That single, soft click when General Hargrove set his champagne flute on the white linen and went still. The string quartet stopping mid-phrase. The silence that followed. Not the silence of shock, but the silence of a room recognizing that it has been operating under a wrong assumption for a long time, and has just been quietly corrected. Constance Whitfield has not contacted me. I did not expect her to. That model of the world does not revise itself in a single evening. It is not my work to revise it. What I know is this: for 8 years, she chose not to ask. She had 11 Thanksgivings, 3 deployments worth of going-away parties, a decade of proximity. She chose to fill the silence with her own assumptions, and she defended them with the certainty of someone who has never needed outside information to confirm what they already believe. That is not my wound to carry. Derek and Lydia Whitfield are in Charleston. I wish them the ordinary life that comes from 2 people who know who they are and choose each other clearly, which is the only kind that holds over time. Constance sent 4 texts in the 48 hours after the wedding. I read all of them. I replied to none. Derek called twice the following Monday. I let both go to voicemail. Neither reached out again after that. I let them believe it for 8 years, and then I drove to Charleston and waited. If you have ever made yourself smaller to fit into a space that was not designed to hold you, if you have ever let someone else's assumptions stand in for your truth because correcting them felt like too much, I want to say something to you. The silence was never agreement. The silence was composure. There is a difference between a person who has nothing to offer and a person who has chosen not to offer it yet. I chose. For 8 years, I chose patience. And then I chose differently. This was not about settling anything. Settling requires you to want something returned. I wanted nothing from Constance Whitfield. I wanted nothing from Derek. What I had driven toward was simply the truth occupying the space it should have always occupied. Nothing more than that. If this story meant something to you, please share it with someone who may need this reminder today. You do not need to announce what you are. You simply need to be present. The room will know. They named me Ghost because in the field, I was never where the enemy expected me to be. I was already somewhere else, already past them. But in that ballroom, in that moment, I understood that the name meant something I had not considered. Ghost doesn't mean invisible. Ghost means you were present in every room they told you that you didn't belong to. It means you were there for all of it. Every deployment, every midnight call, every Thanksgiving at the wrong end of the table, every Easter dinner where someone said the word real and looked directly at you. Ghosts don't disappear. They stay in the walls of every house they ever held together, and you cannot renovate them out.